The rain came in sideways across the fell that morning, and Vivienne Holt was moving too fast for wet flagstone. She had a petition under her arm, a solicitor's appointment in 40 minutes, and 3 years of accumulated legal frustration propelling her across the forecourt of St. Cuthbert's on the Fell, at a pace that left no margin for error. The flagstone tilted. Her boot found the edge of it. Her hand shot out and found something solid. A forearm, black wool, rigid with the tension of a man standing very still in the rain. And the arm caught her before she fell, and the hand that covered hers did so automatically, the way a person catches something that is falling without first deciding to. She looked up. He was tall, dark-coated, his face turned partly away from her toward the chapel door, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had been standing in one place for a long time, because moving felt like abandoning something. He had not been waiting for her. He had not been waiting for anyone. And then the churchwarden's voice came from behind them, elderly, unhurried, carrying across the rain with the calm certainty of a man who had said these words before and expected them to be heard, witnessed and attested in the sight of God and this parish. A second voice, younger, called for the register. Vivienne turned. The man whose arm she held turned with her. 3 witnesses stood in a loose semicircle on the wet stone, and the churchwarden was already walking toward the chapel door with the expression of a man completing a task. The petition under Vivienne's arm slipped free and fell into the puddle at her feet. Neither she nor the man beside her moved to retrieve it. His name, she would learn in the next 4 minutes, was Gideon Ashford, Earl of Northcote. He had been standing in the forecourt of St. Cuthbert's on the Fell because his estate manager of 22 years had died of a fever the previous Tuesday, and the funeral had concluded 20 minutes ago. And Gideon had remained in the forecourt because the alternative was to get into his carriage and drive back to a house that would now be missing a man he had relied upon for most of his adult life. He had not spoken to anyone since the service ended. He had been, in every sense that mattered, entirely alone. Until a woman in a dark blue coat came across the wet flagstone at considerable speed and took hold of his arm. And the churchwarden spoke, and the world rearranged itself around both of them without asking permission. The parish register was open on the churchwarden's desk inside the vestry. The entry was neat, specific, and written in a hand that suggested the churchwarden had done this before and would do it again. Vivienne read it twice. Gideon read it once, then stood very straight and looked at the far wall for a moment. "I will arrange an immediate annulment," he said. His voice was even, low, and entirely without drama. "The fees are not a concern. I can have my solicitor contact yours before the week is out." Vivienne looked at the register entry again. "Who are your solicitors?" "Hartley and Crane in Carlisle." "Then you should know," she said, "that I will consider the proposal and send word through my own." She paused. "Miss Vivienne Holt. My solicitor is Mr. Peel, also in Carlisle." She did not offer her hand. She retrieved the petition from the puddle outside, assessed the damage to it, and walked to her appointment. Mr. Peel's office smelled of coal smoke and old paper, and he had the expression of a man delivering difficult news that he had been turning over in his mind for some time before his client arrived. He waited until Vivienne had sat down and set the ruined petition on the corner of his desk before he spoke. "The difficulty," he said, "is the probate instrument." Vivienne looked at him steadily. "Explain it precisely." "Under the terms of your father's probate, Lord Fenwick holds guardianship over your person and your legal instruments until your 28th birthday. An annulment petition is a legal instrument. It requires his countersignature. Mr. Peel folded his hands on the desk. He will not provide it. You've already asked him. I sent a preliminary inquiry this morning before you arrived, because I anticipated the question. His secretary's reply came back within the hour. Mr. Peel slid the note across the desk. He cites the irregular nature of the union as grounds for contesting any claim you might pursue regarding the estate. His position, as I understand it, is that the marriage, its irregularity, its public record, is more useful to him unresolved than annulled. Vivienne read the note. She set it back on the desk with the precise movements of someone who has decided not to do the thing her body is inclined toward. He wants it to hang over me. He wants it to complicate every legal proceeding you might bring until your birthday renders it moot, at which point the probate instrument dissolves, and the marriage question becomes yours alone to resolve. Mr. Peel hesitated. Miss Holt, your 28th birthday is in 11 days. She sat with this for a moment. Then she stood, straightened her coat, and picked up her ruined petition. Thank you, Mr. Peel. I'll be in touch before the end of the day. She walked to the King's Head Inn, where Gideon Ashford had taken a room, because she had asked the churchwarden's wife, and the churchwarden's wife had told her without being asked twice. The inn's public room was quiet at that hour. Gideon was at a table near the window with a glass of something untouched in front of him, reading a letter, and he looked up when she came in without particular surprise, as though he had been expecting her or someone very like her. She sat down across from him without being invited and placed her hands flat on the table. I need the marriage to stand for 11 days, she said. At midnight on the 11th day, I turned 28, and the probate instrument that gives Lord Fenwick legal authority over my affairs dissolves by operation of law. After that, I can pursue the annulment myself, without his consent. Until then, if you move to annul, Fenwick countersigns the petition and uses the process to delay every other legal action I have pending. She paused. That is the position. I am not asking for more than 11 days. Gideon set the letter down. He looked at her for a moment in a way that was not unfriendly and not warm, simply attentive, as though she were a document he was reading carefully before responding. Separate lodgings, he said, obviously. All correspondence through solicitors. Agreed. Nothing further arranged between us beyond the 11 days? Nothing further, Vivienne said. Do you agree? Gideon looked out the window at the gray fell road. He was quiet for long enough that she began to form the words of a second argument. Then he said, yes, and reached for the letter again, and that was all. 2 days later, Lord Fenwick filed for a declaration of nullity in the ecclesiastical court at Carlisle. Vivienne received the notice from Mr. Peel and read it at the window of her inn-room with the particular expression of someone recognizing, for the first time, the full dimensions of a trap. Fenwick had set the incident in motion to destroy any legitimate claims she might pursue. And now that the marriage existed, he needed it voided before it could be used against him. The man who had engineered the accident now required it unmade. The woman he had tried to ruin now required it to stand. The irony was precise and complete, and it settled over Vivienne like cold water. Gideon's library at Northcote was long and north-facing, with good light in the mornings and the smell of old cloth bindings and something underneath that might have been wood smoke from a previous century. He had offered it without conditions, a key left at the inn, a note saying the housekeeper would light the fire at 7 if she sent word ahead. No hovering, No suggestion that she explain what she needed or how long she would require it. Vivienne noted this, filed it, and arrived at 7:30 on the first morning with 2 boxes of documents and a list of questions for the church warden. Their morning meetings began the second day. They were argumentative in the way that 2 people with different training and the same goal argue, specifically about the church warden's account and whether it would survive challenge, about the relevant precedents in ecclesiastical law, about the gaps in Fenwick's legal position and how quickly he could be expected to exploit them. Gideon had read the precedents before she arrived. She had read different ones. The arguments were substantive and occasionally heated, and neither of them yielded a point without requiring it to be proved first. The church warden's attestation is the weakest element, Vivienne said on the 3rd morning, spreading the document across the library table. Fenwick's barrister will argue that neither party gave spoken consent. Neither party protested, Gideon said, from the other side of the table, which is not the same thing. In canon law, under the pre-1753 precedents, it may be sufficient. Hardwicke changed the requirement for bans and license, not for the verbal formula of attestation before witnesses. He paused. I can have Hartley pull the relevant cases by tomorrow. I've already sent for them, Vivienne said. I'd like to see what Hartley pulls independently. Gideon looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite amusement and not quite respect, and might have been both. I'll send him a separate instruction this afternoon. On the 3rd evening, Fenwick's man appeared at the door of Vivienne's inn. He was a large, unhurried man, with a particular manner of someone who delivers messages that are not precisely threats and not precisely not threats. And he had been speaking for perhaps 30 seconds when the doorway behind Vivienne darkened and Gideon stepped into it. He did not speak. He did not need to. He simply stood there, his height filling the frame, his face entirely neutral. And the large, unhurried man looked at him and reconsidered the remainder of his message, and said he would convey the information to his employer. He left. Gideon remained in the doorway until the man had turned the corner at the end of the street. Then he withdrew without a word. Vivienne closed the door. She stood on the other side of it, with her hand still on the latch. And she did not move for a long moment. Nobody had stood in a doorway for her in 3 years. Nobody had been asked to, and nobody had volunteered. She was aware of this fact, with a clarity that was not comfortable. On the 6th evening, after the documents were sorted and the fire had burned low, Gideon asked what she planned to do after her birthday. Vivienne looked up from the church warden's attestation. The question was direct and contained no advice. She told him. There was a house in Westmoreland that had been her mother's, held in trust under terms that Fenwick had been contesting for 2 years. Once the probate instrument dissolved, the contest dissolved with it. She intended to go to Westmoreland, open the house, and begin the process of making it habitable. She had a plan for the grounds. She had a plan for the income. She had been building both plans in the margins of legal documents for 3 years. Gideon listened to all of it. He did not suggest a different approach. He did not identify problems she had not considered. He did not say anything at all when she finished, except, after a pause, "The fell road to Westmoreland is bad in January. You'll want to go before the frost." Vivienne looked at him. "I know the road," she said. "I know you do," he said, and returned to his document. She sat with that for a moment before returning to hers. It was the first time in 3 years that a person in a position of proximity, a guardian, a solicitor, a man with any authority over any aspect of her affairs, had heard her say she had a plan and had responded by offering a piece of practical information rather than a revision of the plan itself. She did not remark on it. She filed it the way she filed everything. Harriet Ashford arrived at Northcote on a Tuesday without sending word ahead, which Vivienne learned was entirely characteristic of her. She was 23, dark-haired like her brother, and had the manner of someone who had decided on the way through the door exactly what she intended to say, and saw no reason to approach it obliquely. She found Vivienne in the library at 10 in the morning and sat down across from her and said, "I expect Gideon hasn't told you about the solicitor's fees." Vivienne set down her pen. "No." "He's been paying Mr. Peel's account since the second week," Harriet said. "Anonymously through a third party in York. I found out from the third party, who is my friend's husband and has no talent for discretion." She folded her hands on the table. "I thought you should know, because I think you would want to, and I think he calculated that you wouldn't accept it if he told you directly, and he was probably right. But that doesn't make it right that he didn't tell you." Vivienne looked at the document in front of her. "Is there something else?" Harriet's expression shifted, not into evasion, but into something more careful. "If the marriage is annulled and Gideon reverts to unmarried status, our mother has arranged a match for me. A goodwill arrangement with Fenwick's cousin, Mr. Alderton. It was contingent on Gideon having no wife. Alderton's family made that a condition." She paused. "I don't want the match. I want you to know that clearly. But I also want you to know that Gideon has more stake in this than he has told you, and that his stake includes me. And I would rather you heard it from me than from Fenwick's barrister." Vivienne said, "Thank you, Miss Ashford." Her voice was even and her face gave nothing away. Harriet looked at her for a moment. "He isn't a dishonest man," she said. "He's a man who calculates, and sometimes the calculation is wrong." She stood. "That probably doesn't help." "It helps me know what questions to ask," Vivienne said. She spent the next 2 days in the library. She went through every document in the file and reordered them, not because the order needed changing, but because the physical act of handling them helped her think, and she needed to think very carefully about the sequence of Gideon Ashford's motivations and whether the sequence mattered as much as the sum. On the evening of the second day, she went to him in the study where he was working and stood in the doorway until he looked up. "I have questions," she said. "I would like direct answers." "Sit down," he said. She sat. She placed her hands flat on the desk between them, the way she had placed them on the inn table 11 days ago. "First reason you agreed to let the marriage stand." Gideon said, "Because your situation under Fenwick's guardianship was unjust, and I was in a position to complicate it." "Second reason," a pause shorter than the first, "because the legal argument interested me and I wanted to see it made properly." "Third reason," Gideon looked at her steadily, "because a sitting married Earl holds a stronger position against my late wife's family's claim on a portion of my Yorkshire estate, and I knew it within 48 hours of the chapel." Vivienne did not speak. "I told myself," Gideon continued, "that the Yorkshire consideration was separate from the decision. I told myself it came after, and that it was incidental, and that I would have agreed regardless." He stopped. "I am no longer certain of that. I am certain that I knew about it and did not tell you, and that you have been working alongside me for 11 days on that basis." Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. "Is there a fourth reason I don't know yet?" The The pause before he answered was longer than any of the others. It was the pause of a man deciding whether to say something he had not planned to say, weighing it and concluding that the weight of not saying it was heavier. He met her eyes. "No," he said. "There is not." She stood, picked up the document she had brought with her, and left the room without another word. She did not speak to him directly for 5 days. All communication went through Mr. Peel and Hartley, formal, correct, and efficient. Hartley sent documents to Peel. Peel sent questions back to Hartley. The legal case continued to be built with the same precision as before. And if the two solicitors found the arrangement unusual, neither said so in writing. Gideon continued working. He sent Hartley new instructions each morning. He produced 3 additional precedents from the Carlisle ecclesiastical records that Vivienne had not found. He did not reduce the work, and he did not send any communication that was not strictly relevant to the case. On the 3rd day of the 5, Fenwick moved against the churchwarden. The complaint was pretextual, an old dispute about parish accounts that had been settled years before and was now resurrected with the specificity of a document someone had been holding in reserve. The churchwarden was removed from St. Cuthbert's pending a diocesan inquiry. Without the churchwarden available to testify in person, the attestation's weight in court diminished considerably. Vivienne learned of the churchwarden's removal from Mr. Peel. She learned what happened next from a different source entirely. The churchwarden's wife came to the library on the 4th day, having walked 2 miles in November cold, to tell Vivienne that they had been offered a cottage on the Northcote estate, a good cottage with a kitchen garden, beyond the reach of any diocesan inquiry, and certainly beyond the reach of Lord Fenwick. The Earl of Northcote had arranged it within 24 hours of the churchwarden's removal. He had sent his steward personally. He had asked nothing in return. The churchwarden's wife was a small, direct woman who said what she meant. His lordship said the old man's testimony was needed, and the old man needed a roof. And those were 2 separate problems with one solution. She paused. "He didn't ask us to say anything to you about it." Vivienne thanked her, saw her out, and stood in the library doorway for a moment, looking at the fell road. That evening, she wrote a note in her own hand and sent it to the study. It contained 1 sentence. "I would be grateful if you would come to the library at your convenience tomorrow morning." He came at 8 o'clock. She was already at the table. She did not begin with the Yorkshire claim or the solicitor's fees or any of the questions she had already asked. She said, "Tell me about the churchwarden." "He needed a place," Gideon said. "I had one." "You did it before you knew whether I would speak to you again." He answered without hesitation, "Yes." She looked at the document in front of her. "That's all I wanted to know," she said, and pushed the precedent list across the table toward him. "Hartley missed the 1791 case. I need you to look at it." They worked through the morning. The hearing in Carlisle was in 2 days. The night before the hearing, the Northcote Library was cold despite the fire, because the windows were old and the wind off the fell found every gap in the leading. Vivienne had been at the table since midnight. The churchwarden's attestation was in front of her. She had read it many times, and she read it again, and the words did not change. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of the study door, then footsteps in the passage, then the library door opening without a knock. Gideon came in, looked at the fire, added 2 logs without being asked, and sat down in the chair across from her. He did not ask what she was doing or why she was awake. He simply sat. The fire took hold of the new wood. The clock on the mantel marked 3:30. "I'm afraid," Vivienne said. Gideon looked at her. "Not of losing," she said. "I know what losing looks like. I've been managing it for 3 years." She set the attestation down. "I'm afraid of winning, because I have not once, in 11 days, allowed myself to think past the hearing. There is nothing past the hearing in my mind. Just the document and the argument and the next thing to be done." She stopped. "And I don't know what it means that there is nothing there." "I know," Gideon said. He did not follow it with advice. He did not say that she would find something past the hearing, or that the Westmoreland house was waiting, or that fear before a decisive moment was reasonable and would pass. He said 2 words, and let them be enough. And they were enough, because they were the words of a man who had sat with his own version of the same emptiness for 4 years, and had not yet entirely resolved it. They remained in the library until the light changed in the windows and the fire burned down to a deep, steady red. The documents lay on the table between them, the churchwarden's attestation on top. At some point, Vivienne put her head in her hand and closed her eyes. Not sleeping, but resting. And Gideon did not move or speak. The clock marked 5, then 6. When the housekeeper came at 7 to lay the morning fire, she found 2 people at the library table with the particular stillness of people who have been awake all night and have arrived, through the long hours, at a kind of quiet. 2 weeks earlier, on the night before Vivienne had sent the note requesting a meeting, when she had still been routing everything through solicitors, Gideon had come to the library at midnight to retrieve a document and found her asleep at the table. Her cheek resting on the back of her hand, the candle guttered beside her. He had stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he had taken off his coat and set it carefully over her shoulders, and his hand had rested on her shoulder for 1 second. 1 full second, deliberate and then withdrawn, before he stepped back and left the room. In the morning, she found a pressed sprig of something in the coat pocket. She did not know whether it had been left by intention or chance. She kept it in the inside pocket of her document case, and she did not raise the subject, and neither did he. The ecclesiastical court at Carlisle sat in a stone building that had been cold for 300 years and showed no signs of reconsidering. The midwinter morning light came in flat and gray through high windows, and the benches were full. An irregular marriage involving an Earl was not an event the Carlisle legal community would miss. Fenwick was present in the front bench with his barrister, a man named Croft, who had the manner of someone very confident in the document he was about to produce. Vivienne sat at the respondent's table with Mr. Peel on her left, and the churchwarden's attestation and 4 precedents arranged in front of her. Gideon sat behind her, 1 row back, with Hartley at his shoulder. Croft opened well. He had the churchwarden's removal, the question of consent, and a clear argument about the irregularity of the proceedings. Vivienne listened without moving. Mr. Peel made his counter-arguments with the careful precision of a man who had been preparing them for 11 days and knew they were good. Then Croft reached into his case and produced a letter. "My lord," he said to the presiding official, "I submit for the court's consideration a letter written by the respondent's husband, the Earl of Northcote, in which he references in explicit terms the strategic value of remarriage to a sitting earl in the matter of a contested Yorkshire estate claim." He read the relevant passage aloud. The courtroom went quiet in the particular way that courtrooms go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Vivienne did not look at Gideon. She kept her eyes on the document in front of her, and her hands flat on the table, and her face entirely still, while something in the region of her ribs went cold and tight and did not release. Gideon stood. "My lord," he said, and his voice was perfectly level. "The letter Mr. Croft has read was written on the 14th of September. I have the original here, with its date clearly marked." He held it up. On the 14th of September. I had never heard the name Vivienne Holt, and I had no knowledge of Lord Fenwick's guardianship arrangement or his petition against her estate. The letter predates my knowledge of this matter by 10 days. Croft began to speak. Gideon continued, "If the court wishes to see the correspondence in which I subsequently instructed my solicitor to pursue the validity of this marriage for Miss Holt's sake, without reference to any Yorkshire consideration, I can produce it." He paused. "I can also produce the instrument by which I withdrew the Yorkshire claim in its entirety, executed 5 days ago. Both documents are here." He laid them on the table. Hartley brought them forward. The presiding official read them with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had learned that the documents usually told the truth. Croft had no further instrument. The official's ruling was brief and unambiguous. The marriage was valid. The attestation before witnesses satisfied the relevant precedents. The declaration of nullity was denied. Vivienne gathered her documents with precise, careful movements. She stood. She nodded to Mr. Peel. She walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone and into the cold Carlisle street. And she walked the full length of the building without stopping, her breath making small clouds in the winter air, the sound of her boots on the stone very clear in the cold. At the corner she stopped. She heard him behind her, not hurrying, not hesitating, simply walking at his usual pace. He stopped when she stopped. She turned. "The Yorkshire claim," she said. "You withdrew it before the hearing, before you knew what Croft would bring. If the letter had never appeared, the withdrawal would have cost you the claim and given you nothing in return." She looked at him directly. "Why?" Gideon looked back at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has decided to set it down. "Because it was the only honest version of the argument I could make," he said. "If I stood in that court and argued that the marriage was valid for your sake, while I still held a claim that benefited from its validity, I would be making your case and my case simultaneously and calling them the same thing. I couldn't do it." He paused. "I didn't want to." Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. The cold air moved between them, a cart went past on the street behind her, and a dog barked somewhere 2 streets away. And the world continued its ordinary business, entirely indifferent to the 2 people standing at the corner of a Carlisle street in December. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief and entirely deliberate, her choice, her initiation, her hands not touching him, and her eyes open for the first second of it. She stepped back. "I'll need to see the withdrawal document," she said. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile and not quite relief, and was, perhaps, both. "I'll have it sent," he said. The 10 days that followed moved with the brisk efficiency of legal processes finally running in the right direction. The Yorkshire claim was formally dropped, the paperwork filed and sealed, and the family of Gideon's late wife received the news through their solicitors with the cold silence of people who had expected a different outcome. Harriet's arranged match to Fenwick's cousin, Mr. Alderton, collapsed within the week. Alderton's family had required Gideon's unmarried status as a condition, and Gideon was no longer unmarried, and the condition could not be met. and the arrangement dissolved without ceremony. Harriet sent Vivienne a brief note containing 3 words. "Good, thank you." Vivienne read it twice and put it in her document case beside the pressed sprig. On the morning of Vivienne's 28th birthday, she woke before dawn in the Northcote guest room. She had moved from the inn 4 days after the hearing, at Harriet's insistence and with Gideon's complete neutrality on the subject, and lay in the dark and felt the probate instrument dissolve. There was no sound, no ceremony, no document to sign. Lord Fenwick's guardianship over her person and her legal affairs simply ceased to exist at midnight by operation of law, the way a storm ceases, and the morning that followed was the first morning in 3 years that she belonged entirely to herself. Fenwick did not contest it. He had no instrument left to contest it with. Gideon had arranged a reinstatement proceeding for the churchwarden at St. Cuthbert's, a small formal matter before the diocesan authority, the pretextual complaint examined and dismissed, the old man's position at the parish restored with the particular quiet thoroughness that characterized everything Gideon arranged. The proceeding was set for the 2nd week of January. Vivienne asked if she might attend. Gideon said yes. It was a small party that gathered at St. Cuthbert's on the Fell on a January morning. The churchwarden and his wife, the diocesan representative, Hartley, and Mr. Peel's standing together with the slightly awkward cordiality of solicitors who have been corresponding across a dispute for weeks, and Vivienne and Gideon standing slightly apart from the others. The winter sun was low and bright, and the Fell was white to the north, and the forecourt stones were dry for the first time since October. The proceeding took 20 minutes. When it concluded, the small party dispersed in the gradual way of people with no particular reason to linger, and the churchwarden shook Gideon's hand and said something quiet that Vivienne could not hear. And his wife pressed Vivienne's hand briefly and did not say anything at all, which was better. And then the forecourt was empty, except for the 2 of them. Vivienne stood looking at the flagstone. It was an ordinary flagstone, gray and slightly uneven, indistinguishable from the 20 around it, except that she knew exactly where its edge was, and exactly how the rain had made it treacherous on an October morning, when she was moving too fast with a petition under her arm and 3 years of frustration propelling her forward. She had thought about that flagstone many times in the past 11 weeks. She had not decided what to think about it. Gideon came to stand beside her. He looked at the flagstone too, briefly. Then he turned toward her and offered his arm, the same gesture, the black wool of his coat under the winter sun. And the offering was formal and entirely deliberate, made with a full knowledge of what it had meant the first time and what it meant now. And the difference between those 2 meanings was the whole of what had happened between them. Vivienne looked at his arm. She looked at his face. He waited, without hurrying her, without suggesting the answer. She took his arm. They walked through the doors of St. Cuthbert's on the Fell together, and the doors closed behind them, and the forecourt was quiet in the winter sun. Inside, the parish register lay open on the churchwarden's desk. It held 2 entries now, the first in an autumn hand, rain-smudged at the edge, recording a wet October morning and a woman who had caught the arm of the nearest solid thing on wet flagstone. The second in a winter hand, clean and certain, recording 2 people who had read the first entry and chosen, with full knowledge of everything it had cost them both to arrive here, to add their names to it again.